The morning after the funeral, I woke to the echo of hammering, 3 sharp knocks against wood. When I opened the door, a county sheriff stood under the gray dawn, rain dripping off his hat brim. He didn't look at me when he taped a yellow notice to vacate onto my peeling front door. Across the cul-de-sac, my brother David raised a glass of champagne from the marble balcony of our parents' 5-acre estate. I could almost hear the laughter of his new friends, the kind who never showed up until someone died. I stood barefoot on the rotting porch of the house I'd just inherited, shivering not from the cold, but from the feeling that something about all this was wrong. The will had hit probate like a guillotine. Swift, cold, final. Estate to David Chandler, the clerk had read aloud with no pause or pity. Crumbling Maple Street property to Eli Chandler. Me. The spectators in the courtroom, relatives, lawyers, even a local reporter, shifted in their seats, whispering. Everyone knew what that meant. David got the estate worth millions. I got a condemned shack on the bad side of town, a house that looked like grief itself. When I walked inside that first night, the air reeked of mold and old rain. Every step stirred dust and memory. The plaster was falling off in sheets, and the pipes coughed like a dying animal. Water stains formed crooked halos across the ceiling. My parents hadn't lived here in 20 years, yet it still smelled faintly of my mother's lavender soap. The silence felt heavy, as if the house itself knew secrets it wasn't supposed to tell. Neighbors stopped by the next morning with casseroles and condolences. Such a tragedy, one said, gripping my arm. Carbon monoxide from a faulty heater, wasn't it? Another whispered, so sudden. They seemed so healthy. I smiled and nodded, but inside a question burned. Our heaters were brand new, installed last fall. There was no reason for them to fail. That night, as rain began to drum against the roof, I went searching for answers. The first sign came from the county recorder's office. A woman named Ms. Vargas called, her voice tight. Mr. Chandler, there's an irregularity with your parents' will. She hesitated. Your mother's signature. Our system shows it was executed at 2:13 a.m. the night before their deaths. Fresh ink. We're required to note that. I remember gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. 2:13 in the morning, the same hour the coroner listed as the approximate time of death. How could she have signed anything if she was already gone? I hung up and stood there in the center of the living room, heart hammering, staring at the faded carpet beneath my feet. Something told me I wasn't standing in a house, I was standing on evidence. I grabbed a utility knife from my toolbox and sliced open the corner of the carpet. A loose board creaked beneath. Beneath it, hidden in dust and cobwebs, was a sealed envelope tied with red thread. My name was written across it in my mother's looping script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were 3 items: a tiny metal key, a hand-drawn sketch of the living room wall with an X marked near the baseboard, and a note written in her voice. Don't trust the will. Trust the house. My breath caught. What did she mean? I pressed my ear against the marked section of wall. It sounded hollow. I found the exact spot and slipped the key into a small, almost invisible groove near the molding. The mechanism clicked softly, like a lock surrendering its secret. The panel loosened, and from within the wall a small metal box fell into my hands. It was cold and heavier than it looked. A note was taped to the lid. If this is open, we're already gone. Inside, nestled among old family photographs, was a flash drive labeled Estate Poison Pill MP4. My heart pounded. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting it to explode. The screen blinked to life, and there she was, my mother. Her face pale, her voice shaking. Eli, she said, looking straight into the camera, if you're watching this, your father and I didn't die by accident. We were being watched. If anything happens, look into the estate documents. And trust no one. Especially David. I froze. She glanced off screen, whispering something to my father. He appeared behind her, exhausted but resolute. We left the truth inside the Maple Street house, he said. What we found, what Wilder was doing, it's bigger than us. Don't let them bury it with us. The screen cut to static. My laptop fan whirred loudly in the silence that followed. Then, suddenly, 3 heavy knocks rattled my door. I jumped. Through the peephole, 2 men stood on my porch, black suits, sunglasses, badges I didn't recognize. Behind them, my brother's SUV idled in the rain. One of the men raised his voice. Mr. Chandler, we're with estate security. We need to collect property that doesn't belong to you. My pulse raced. My brother's voice carried faintly from behind them. He's trespassing. That house is under review. I yanked the laptop's cord, shoved the flash drive into my pocket, and backed away from the door. My mind screamed questions. Estate security? Why was David here? And what did Mom mean by poison pill? The banging grew louder, more aggressive. Mr. Chandler, open the door now! I ran toward the back exit, but before I reached it, I heard the metallic click of a key sliding into the front lock, the same key I'd just used to open the wall. The door creaked open, slow and deliberate. Rain spilled in through the crack, and in that instant, standing in the dim, decaying living room of my so-called inheritance, I realized this wasn't about money. It was about whatever secret my parents had died to protect. As footsteps echoed closer, I clutched the flash drive, heart hammering, and whispered to myself the last words my mother had written. Don't trust the will. Trust the house. They served me the restraining order on a Wednesday morning, 2 days after I'd watched my mother's final video. The ink was still wet when the estate's private security officer handed it over. Per court order, he said, voice flat as gravel. You're to stay 100 yards from Chandler Estate. No exceptions. Behind him, my brother David stood in a tailored gray suit, arms folded, sunglasses hiding whatever guilt might have been in his eyes. This is for your own good, Eli, he said, pretending calm. But the way his fingers twitched around his car keys told a different story. I wanted to yell. To ask why the hell he was siding with outsiders, why he was suddenly playing defense for the estate's lawyer, Dane Wilder, a man who had built half the town's developments and buried the other half in lawsuits. But I didn't. I just stared at him until he shifted his weight, uncomfortable, and muttered, You need to move on. The same phrase he'd used at the funeral. When they left, I went back inside my crumbling house and locked every door. The place creaked like an old animal shifting in its sleep. I pulled out my laptop, plugged in the flash drive again, and hit play from where I'd left off. My mother's trembling voice filled the room. Eli, we split the assets to protect you. The Maple Street house holds what the estate can't. If David is reading this, he's already compromised. Her words sent a chill through me. On screen, a slideshow of images flashed. Dad with bruised knuckles, a check signed by Wilder's development company, and a photo of my brother at a charity gala, shaking Wilder's hand. Then came a scanned clause from a trust schedule I'd never seen before. The header read, Chandler Family Community Provisions. Below it, in my father's handwriting, if fraud, coercion or post-mortem alteration is proven, title to the Chandler estate shall transfer to the Chandler community land. Trust. My father had built a trap inside his own. Will the next slide froze on a photo of something half buried behind the orchard, rusted barrels, each marked with faded hazmat symbols and the years 2003-2011. I felt my stomach knot. My parents had hinted for years that Wilder's company had been using the estate's land for storage. But storage of what? My heart thudded as realization dawned. The barrels were waste. Toxic, illegal, hidden right under the orchard where neighborhood kids played every spring. I paused the video and checked my late mother's email login. Her credentials were still saved in the browser. There, buried among hundreds of newsletters, was an alert from our old Ring camera account. A motion notification dated 2 nights before the funeral. I opened it. The footage loaded, grainy but clear enough to make me stop breathing. A black SUV pulled into the estate's driveway at exactly 2:07 a.m., headlights off. The driver stepped out first, Dane Wilder. The passenger door opened next, revealing David. He looked nervous, glancing around before following Wilder toward the back fence, the same direction the barrels were buried. I printed the still frames, sealed them in an envelope, and drove to the county courthouse. My hand shook the entire time. When my case was called, I placed the envelope on the clerk's table and handed over the thumb drive with the video file. I have reason to believe the will was altered after my parents' deaths, I said, voice tight. The judge raised an eyebrow but agreed to review the materials. Opposing counsel, a slick attorney hired by Wilder's firm, stood with a smirk. Your Honor, he said, Mrs. Chandler often suffered insomnia. Signing at 2:13 a.m. isn't suspicious. It's consistent with her habits. He smiled at me like he'd just delivered a punchline. The judge, unimpressed, ordered a forensic ink analysis of the will. If we find tampering, she said, this entire inheritance division is void. I caught Wilder's expression in the back row. Calm, almost bored as if he'd already bought the verdict. That night, I tried to sleep, but every creak of the old house made me flinch. Around 2 a.m., the smoke alarm shrieked. The air turned thick, bitter and metallic. Fire. I dropped from bed and crawled across the floor. Flames licked up the hallway like orange tongues. I grabbed the envelope of court evidence and the flash drive, coughing as I stumbled toward the living room. That's when I remembered the map my mother had drawn. The X on the wall. The message, "Trust the house." I pressed my palm against the same spot again, expecting nothing. But this time, when I pushed harder, the wall gave way with a low groan. The hidden metal box didn't drop out, it slid deeper. Behind it was a narrow shaft, a crawl space lined with dust and metal brackets. Smoke billowed above me, but instinct said go down. I squeezed into the opening, my flashlight cutting through spider webs and soot. The shaft led to a short stairwell of concrete steps and, at the bottom, a heavy steel door. My lungs burned, but I forced my shaking hand across the surface until I found a faint etching scratched into the wall, 1987, my birth year. I spun the lock to that code, and with a metallic hiss, the safe door released. Inside sat a weathered banker's pouch, a stack of notarized documents, and a sealed manila envelope marked personal, for Eli only. I tore it open. Inside was a birth certificate, not mine. The father's name box was empty, and the mother's name wasn't my mother's. My heart slammed against my ribs. Paper clipped to it was a small handwritten note in my mother's script. David is not a Chandler by blood. Ask Wilder who he is. The house popped above me, wood snapping under heat. I stuffed everything into my jacket and climbed back toward the smoke. Flames roared around the doorway, but somehow I made it outside, coughing, shaking, clutching the pouch against my chest. Across the street, a figure stood watching from the shadows, tall, still, coat collar pulled up. I couldn't see his face, but I knew the posture. Wilder. He turned away as sirens wailed in the distance, the glow of the fire lighting his outline. And in that moment, I understood what my parents had died trying to reveal. This wasn't just about a crooked will. This was about bloodlines, buried crimes, and a man powerful enough to rewrite both. By dawn, the street looked like a war zone. News vans clogged the cul-de-sac, reporters shouting questions over each other as if my family's tragedy were some Netflix scandal dropped at midnight. Local heirs battle over suspicious will, read the Chiron flashing across one camera feed. Another reporter called out, "Eli, are you accusing your brother of forgery?" I ignored them, walking straight through the crowd toward the courthouse. My brother David was already there, press suit, clean shave, smirk rehearsed. He looked like the perfect heir, the golden son. If anyone had seen us side by side, they'd never guess one of us had crawled out of a burning house the night before. As I approached, he tried to smile. "You look terrible," he said, voice dripping in false concern. I stared at him cold. "Why were you at the recorder's office at 2 a.m., David?" His smirk faltered just for a moment. He recovered fast, glancing toward the reporters. "You're losing it, Eli," he said. "Grief does that." But his eyes betrayed him. They flicked toward the orchard, toward the soil hiding our parents' secret. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy with perfume, sweat, and fear. The judge adjusted her glasses as the forensic examiner took the stand. "Your Honor," he began, "our analysis shows the signatures on page 3 of the will are fresh, created within 24 to 48 hours of filing." Gasps rippled through the gallery. My pulse raced. The judge's pen paused midair. "Meaning?" she asked. "Meaning," the examiner said carefully, "the signatures could not have been written by Mrs. Chandler before her death." For a moment, no one breathed. Then Wilder, the developer, leaned forward from the back row, the ghost of a smile curving his lips. His eyes locked on mine, calm and calculating. The judge cleared her throat. "Until further notice," she said, "all estate transfers are frozen pending investigation." A small victory, but one that felt like oxygen after weeks underwater. I opened my briefcase and slid something across the table toward my brother's attorney. A birth certificate, the one I'd found in the panic room. The woman's name on it wasn't my mother's. "Explain this," I said, voice low. David's face went pale. He stared at the document like it was a weapon, which, in a way, it was. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. Before he could say more, Wilder stood, adjusting his cufflinks with the calm arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "these family rumors are irrelevant. My company merely what?" I interrupted, rising to my feet. My voice echoed through the courtroom. "Dumped toxic waste under our orchard for a decade?" The silence that followed was absolute. Even the reporters in the back froze. Wilder's jaw clenched just slightly, the first crack in his armor. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Chandler," she said carefully, "if your claims have merit, we'll need verification." She turned to the clerk. "Order environmental testing on the Chandler estate immediately. The property is sealed until results are confirmed." The gavel struck like thunder. That night, my childhood home, the Maple Street house, was taped off as a fire investigation site. The officials told me not to enter, but I couldn't stay away. The air still smelled of ash when I crawled back inside through the broken kitchen window. I found my way to the crawlspace again, flashlight trembling in my hand. I slid down the narrow shaft to the hidden safe room, my fingers tracing soot-streaked concrete until I found the banker's pouch I'd taken before the fire. Inside were documents I hadn't yet read, deeds, contracts, notarized letters. One caught my eye, a deed of trust for Maple Street LLC, listing 42 rental units across the city's south side. My name was typed in clean, bold print as sole successor. I flipped through the next page, a letter from my father, dated 6 months before their deaths. His words felt like a whisper from the grave. "Eli, if you're reading this, it means the trap has been sprung. If David colludes with Wilder, the estate becomes a liability, not an inheritance. Whoever holds title will carry personal responsibility for the cleanup and lawsuits that follow. Don't save the estate. Save the truth." I leaned against the wall, shaking. My father had turned the Chandler estate into a time bomb. Whoever tried to own it would be destroyed by the very crimes it concealed. David had been played. Wilder had been played. And now, so had I. A noise above me snapped me back. Footsteps. 2 of them. Slow, deliberate. A floorboard groaned. I killed my flashlight. The voices were muffled, but I recognized one immediately. Wilder's. "He came back," he said. "I told you he would," another man replied, voice shaky. "David. He's my brother. He's not dangerous." "Everyone's dangerous when they know too much," Wilder hissed. A metallic scrape echoed overhead, tools against metal. They were prying something open. My throat tightened. I crouched lower, clutching the banker's pouch to my chest. A boot heel slammed against the hatch above me. Dust rained down. "Found his rat tunnel," one of them said. The hatch burst open, flooding the space with dim light. Wilder's silhouette filled the frame. His voice was calm, almost bored. "You should have stayed quiet, kid." He struck a match and let it fall. The tiny flame hissed out as it landed in a pool of ash. He smiled down at me. "Walk away, Eli. I own your brother. I own your judge. I own your whole damn cul-de-sac." Before I could speak, something cold touched the back of my neck. Not a knife, something round, metallic, adhesive. I turned slightly and saw David crouched beside me in the dark, eyes wide with fear. His hands trembled as he pressed an AirTag against my jacket collar. "Run," he whispered. "Don't ask how. Just run!" Then the hatch slammed shut. Above me, footsteps pounded, muffled voices shouted, and in the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise, slow at first, then deafening. I clutched the pouch and crawled toward the back of the tunnel, the echoes of my brother's whisper chasing me into the dark. At dawn, the estate was no longer quiet or sacred. It was a crime scene. Police cruisers lined the driveway like an army, and men in green jackets marked EPA combed through the orchard, dragging radar equipment over the soil. Every few seconds, a machine beeped like a heart monitor, and another rusted barrel surfaced from the earth. The air was thick with the smell of wet dirt and guilt. Reporters crowded behind the gates, shouting questions, flashes bursting through the fog. "Toxic dumping confirmed at Chandler Estate." One woman yelled into her microphone, her voice trembling with adrenaline. Inside what used to be our home, I found my brother sitting in my smoke-black kitchen, the same kitchen that had almost killed me 2 nights ago. He looked nothing like the man who had smiled on that balcony. His eyes were red, his hands shaking, his clothes wrinkled as if he hadn't slept. When he saw me, his mouth quivered. "I didn't know what Wilder was doing," he said. "I swear to God, Eli, I didn't know about the waste. I just wanted the estate. He promised he could fix the will. Stop," I said quietly, sliding a folder toward him. Inside were the affidavits I'd found in the hidden room, the ones in Dad's handwriting. David flipped through them, confusion shifting to horror. I tapped the line my father had underlined twice. If either son signs any document under duress, the estate must transfer to the Chandler Community Land Trust unless both sons make a public confession within 7 days. David looked up slowly. "Public confession?" he whispered, like the words tasted foreign. I nodded and pointed to the header written in my father's bold, stubborn script, the confession clause. It was a trap, one my father had built years ago. A failsafe buried inside the family trust, designed to turn guilt into justice. If either of us was coerced, bribed, or complicit, the estate would automatically revert to a community trust. But if both sons confessed, publicly, truthfully, the clause would trigger mercy, immunity from prosecution, and full exposure of the corruption Wilder had planted. David sat back, rubbing his temples. "You think this will work?" he asked. I looked out the cracked window, where federal agents were now photographing the barrels. "It's not about working," I said. "It's about finishing what they started." Later that morning, we walked into court together for the first time in months. The gallery fell silent. My brother's lawyer looked like he'd swallowed glass. Opposing counsel immediately moved to unfreeze the estate assets. "Your Honor," he argued, "the allegations are unproven. My client is suffering unnecessary harm." But the judge, tired, sharp-eyed, and now clearly skeptical, raised a hand. "Motion denied," she said. "We're not playing games with contaminated land or forged wills." David rose from his seat, hands trembling. "Your Honor," he said, voice cracking, "I have new evidence." He tapped his phone and mirrored it onto the courtroom monitor. A video file loaded, time-stamped 2 weeks before our parents' deaths. The image came into focus, our dining room table, the chandelier glowing warm above it. And there they were, Mom and Dad alive, frightened, whispering into the camera. Dad's voice was gravel. "If you're seeing this, something went wrong. Wilder is blackmailing us. He's been using the orchard to store illegal waste. We're turning the estate into a trap for him." Mom leaned closer to the camera, eyes raw with fear and love. "Eli gets maple, it holds the keys. David," she hesitated, "if you're with Wilder, the only thing that can save you is the truth. Both of you must tell it. Together." The courtroom went silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I looked at David, and for the first time in years, I saw the little boy I grew up with, the one who used to sneak cookies before dinner, the one who always looked to me before making a bad decision. Wilder stood up suddenly, his calm mask gone. "This is fabrication!" he shouted. "Staged!" He lunged toward the screen, but 2 bailiffs grabbed him by the arms, forcing him back. The judge's gavel cracked through the tension. "Enough!" she barked. "Mr. Wilder, you are under arrest for fraud and environmental violations. Bailiffs, take him into custody." As they cuffed him, he glared at us both. "You think this ends with me?" he hissed. "You're still part of it." The judge didn't look at him again. "This court refers all evidence to the district attorney," she said, voice firm. "Proceedings for civil and criminal charges will commence immediately." Outside, the cul-de-sac looked like a church congregation. Neighbors, reporters, even strangers gathered at the estate gates, waiting for a glimpse of the brothers whose family secrets had just torn a hole through the town's reputation. The wind carried the faint sound of cameras clicking and whispers rising. David climbed up onto the marble pillar beside the gate. Our father used to stand there when giving speeches during holiday fundraisers. His voice shook as he faced the crowd. "My name is David Chandler," he began. "And I'm not a Chandler by blood." Gasps rippled through the crowd. His hands gripped the stone as he continued. "I helped file a fraudulent will. I let greed blind me. I let a man like Wilder own me." He turned to me, eyes wet. "And I'm asking my brother to help me fix it." The silence that followed was unbearable. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind rustling the scorched leaves of the orchard. I stepped forward, standing beside him. "The truth," I said quietly, "is the only thing left worth inheriting." Before anyone could react, 3 black SUVs rolled up, engines rumbling. Men in suits stepped out, badges flashing silver in the morning light. The lead agent, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, lifted her sunglasses and said, "Eli and David Chandler." We both nodded, bracing for handcuffs, for the end of everything. Instead, she smiled faintly. "We need you to come with us," she said. "Your parents are waiting." The world froze. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I couldn't breathe. "Our parents are dead," I whispered. The agent's eyes softened. "Not anymore," she said. "At least, not to the world." And with that, she gestured to the SUVs. Doors opened. Engines idled. Cameras clicked furiously as we stepped toward them, hearts pounding, wondering if the dead could really come back, or if we were about to enter the final twist of our family's curse. The drive to the federal building was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the SUV's engine. David sat beside me, hands clasped tight, his eyes darting between the tinted windows as if he expected this to be another trick. Another layer of deception built into our cursed inheritance. I wanted to believe the agent's words, but they echoed in my head like an impossible riddle. Your parents are waiting. The last time I saw them, they were zipped into body bags. No amount of hope could make sense of that. The building itself was an unremarkable slab of gray concrete tucked between warehouses on the edge of the city. Inside, the air smelled like old paper, copier toner, and burned coffee.
The agents led us down a narrow corridor lit by buzzing fluorescent lights, past locked rooms and muffled voices.
Finally, we stopped at a steel door with a keypad lock. The agent swiped her badge, typed a code, and the door clicked open. I will never forget the sound that came next. A sharp inhale, a gasp that broke the silence like glass. My mother stood there, alive, her face thinner, her hair shorter, but her eyes, the same soft blue that once calmed every storm, were unmistakable. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My father appeared behind her, leaning on a cane, older, pale, but undeniably real. I stepped forward and my mother pulled me into her arms, trembling. "We had to make the world believe we were gone," she whispered. "It was the only way to protect the investigation, and both of you." My father reached for David's shoulder. "And we had to see who each of you would become when the house collapsed." His voice cracked with a mix of pride and exhaustion. David didn't speak. He just nodded, tears slipping down his face as he buried his head in Dad's chest. For the first time since the will was read, I felt something close to peace. We sat together in a small conference room, the walls lined with files and evidence boxes stamped with government seals. An EPA official slid a heavy envelope across the table, marked in bold type. Chandler Trust. Distribution addendum, to be opened upon confession. The agent explained everything. Our parents had gone to the authorities. Months before their deaths. They had discovered Wilder's dumping scheme, his company using the Chandler estate as a private landfill for toxic waste while bribing city inspectors to look away. When they threatened to expose him, he retaliated, forcing them to sign the falsified will under duress. To save their lives and gather proof, they cooperated with the EPA and entered witness protection, staging their deaths with federal help. The carbon monoxide leak had been an elaborate cover, one they never intended to reveal unless we triggered the confession clause. My mother looked at us, her eyes filled with quiet sorrow. "We didn't know who to trust anymore," she said. "Not the courts. Not the police. Not even our own son." She looked at David and he looked away. My father unfolded the documents inside the envelope. "The addendum," he said, "finalizes the estate's purpose." He handed me the papers first. My name appeared next to a new line item, transfer of 42 rental units and Maple Street LLC holdings. Beside it, a note written in his handwriting, for rebuilding what was lost. I turned the page and saw David's name under a different clause. Tuition and living stipend contingent upon full testimony against Wilder and completion of rehabilitation. My father didn't have to say what kind of rehab. It was written between the lines, in all the ways David had been slipping long before this mess began. At the bottom of the addendum was a single paragraph that froze the air around us. If both sons confess publicly to their involvement, whether through action or silence, the confession clause shall trigger mercy. No criminal referral shall be made. Proceeds from the civil settlement shall fund the Chandler Community Land Trust for the benefit of the town. My father's voice was steady but soft. "Blood never made you brothers," he said. "Choices did." David looked at me, eyes red and glassy. "Do it," he whispered. "Let's finish it." Hours later, we stood once again at the estate gates, facing a sea of reporters and flashing cameras. My heart pounded as microphones surged toward us. David spoke first, voice trembling but strong. "We were part of something built on lies," he said. "But today we're choosing truth." I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the flash drive still in my pocket, the one my mother had left behind. I raised my voice so the world could hear. Wilder poisoned this land, and our family's silence nearly let him get away with it. But this, I gestured toward the orchard behind us, will belong to the community forever. The next day, the headlines changed tone. Brothers expose developer in landmark environmental case. The DA cut us a deal. No charges, no jail. Wilder wasn't so lucky. The sound of his handcuffs clicking shut in the courtroom was like a metronome for justice, steady and final. A year later, the land was reborn. The orchard reopened under a new name, Chandler Commons, a public park filled with wildflowers, fruit trees, and laughter. Children ran between rows of saplings planted where the barrels once lay. The ground could finally breathe again. The old Maple Street house was rebuilt as a community center, painted in soft amber and white. Inside, we opened a legal aid clinic for families who had been cheated by forged wills and predatory developers. In the lobby hung a framed copy of the clause that had saved us all, the confession clause, mercy after truth. People still ask what my parents really left me. They think it was the rental properties, the bonds, the trust fund, but they're wrong. They left me a ruin that taught me how to build. They left me a brother I could finally keep. And they left me a truth more valuable than any inheritance, that justice doesn't come from money or bloodlines, but from courage. Every morning, I unlock the front doors of the community center. Above them, carved into the stone archway, are the words my mother once wrote on that letter hidden beneath the floorboards. "Don't trust the will. Trust the house." Now I finally understand. The house was never just wood and stone. It was us, broken, rebuilt, and finally whole.